Marcus Wilson signed the divorce papers with a satisfied smile, his pregnant wife Elena trembling across from him as she clutched her barely showing belly. Completely unaware that the fragile woman he was abandoning secretly owned the multi-billion-dollar empire that employed him, financed his lifestyle, and controlled every asset he thought belonged to his family. He divorced her without a second thought to marry her best friend Victoria, the woman who had whispered poison in his ear for months, both of them utterly unaware of Elena's $800 million personal fortune hidden behind layers of trusts and corporations that even her own husband never suspected existed. What Elena did next would shock them both in ways that would unravel everything they thought they knew about power, wealth, and the quiet woman they had so carelessly betrayed. But who was Elena Wilson really? And why had she hidden an empire from the man she loved? What secrets lay buried in her past that made her choose silence over revelation? And when Marcus discovered the truth about the woman carrying his child, would it be too late to undo the devastation he had unleashed? The coffee shop smelled of burnt espresso and broken promises as Elena sat across from Marcus, her hands wrapped around a cup she hadn't touched in 20 minutes. The divorce papers lay between them like a corpse neither wanted to acknowledge. But Marcus pushed them closer with an impatient finger, his Rolex catching the afternoon light. She noticed he was wearing the watch she'd bought him for their 3rd anniversary, back when she still believed love could survive anything. Back before Victoria had slithered into their lives with her perfect smile and calculated sympathy. "Just sign them, Elena," Marcus said, his voice carrying that edge of irritation she'd heard increasingly over the past 6 months. "We both know this marriage is over. You're not giving me what I need anymore." Elena's hand moved instinctively to her stomach, where their child grew in secret, a truth she'd discovered just 3 days ago and hadn't yet found the courage to share. She had imagined telling him over dinner at the restaurant where he'd proposed, had pictured his face lighting up with joy, had foolishly believed a baby might heal the growing distance between them. But then Victoria had shown up at their house yesterday with that triumphant gleam in her eyes, and Elena had understood that some betrayals ran too deep for redemption. "What about everything we built together?" Elena asked quietly, though she already knew the answer. Marcus didn't know what they'd really built. He thought the comfortable life they lived came from his mid-level position at Meridian Industries, thought the nice house in Westchester came from his salary and some inheritance she'd vaguely mentioned. He had no idea that Meridian Industries was just one small division of the empire she'd constructed from nothing, that the inheritance she'd mentioned was actually the fortune she'd amassed before they'd even met. Marcus laughed, the sound bitter and foreign. "Together? Elena, you've been coasting on my success for years. Victoria makes me feel alive again, makes me feel like a man worth something. She sees my potential in ways you never could." Elena felt something crack inside her chest, but she kept her face carefully neutral. She'd learned emotional control in boardrooms far more hostile than this coffee shop, had mastered the art of revealing nothing while absorbing everything. Victoria saw his potential. Victoria saw a meal ticket, a stepping stone, a fool. But Elena wouldn't say that. Not yet. Not when Marcus was still blind to the puppet strings being pulled. Through the coffee shop window, Elena caught a glimpse of Victoria waiting in Marcus's car, her perfectly manicured hand resting possessively on the dashboard. Her best friend. The woman who had cried on Elena's shoulder about her own failed marriage just 8 months ago, who had moved into their guest room temporarily, who had slowly, methodically poisoned the well of their relationship with subtle comments and strategic displays of admiration that fed Marcus's ego while starving Elena of trust. Elena remembered the moment she'd known for certain about the affair. She'd come home early from what Marcus thought was her volunteer work at the Children's Hospital, but which had actually been an emergency board meeting about a hostile takeover attempt of one of her pharmaceutical subsidiaries. She'd found Victoria's lipstick on Marcus's collar, the same shade Victoria had gushed about buying just days before. And instead of confronting them, Elena had gone into her home office and begun making plans. "The house is mine," Marcus continued, pulling out another set of papers. "My lawyer says since you didn't work during our marriage, you're not entitled to much. You'll get a small settlement, enough to start over somewhere. Victoria and I will need space for the family we're planning." The words struck like hammers. Elena looked down at her own secret, the child Marcus didn't know existed, the heir to an empire he couldn't fathom. She thought about telling him right then, watching his face as he realized what he was abandoning. But something stopped her. A man who would throw away what they had wasn't worthy of knowing what they could have had. "I'll sign," Elena said finally, reaching for the pen. "I just want to keep working at the children's hospital. It's the only thing that makes me feel useful." Marcus waved dismissively. "Sure, whatever. Do your charity work." He stood, leaving cash for his coffee, but not hers. "Don't try to ask for more than you deserve, Elena. You brought nothing to this marriage." As Marcus walked away, Elena pulled out her phone and made a call. "It's done," she said quietly. "Execute phase 1. 3 days later, Marcus arrived at Meridian Industries for what he assumed would be a normal workday. His coffee in one hand and Victoria's encouraging text message still glowing on his phone screen. She'd moved into the house already, redecorating Elena's spaces with aggressive enthusiasm, erasing 5 years of marriage like chalk from a board. Marcus had felt momentarily guilty watching Elena pack her belongings into a small car, looking so lost and fragile. But Victoria had reminded him that he deserved happiness, deserved a woman who appreciated his ambition. The security guard at the front desk gave Marcus an odd look as he swiped his badge. But the light turned green and Marcus headed to the elevators, already mentally preparing for his presentation to the regional director. This promotion would change everything. Victoria had been hinting about engagement rings, about the kind of wedding that would announce their union to the world, and Marcus needed the salary bump to afford the life she envisioned. But when the elevator doors opened on the 15th floor, Marcus found his desk surrounded by security personnel and a woman in a severe black suit holding a cardboard box. His stomach dropped as recognition set in. This was what happened when people got fired. "Mr. Wilson?" the woman said, her voice professionally detached. "I'm Rebecca Foster from Human Resources. I need you to come with me." "There must be some mistake," Marcus said, his voice cracking slightly. "I have a presentation this afternoon. Regional Director Patterson specifically requested me for the expansion project." Rebecca's expression didn't change. "Mr. Wilson, as of this morning, your employment with Meridian Industries has been terminated. You'll need to surrender your badge, laptop, and any company property. You have 15 minutes to collect personal items from your desk." The world tilted. Marcus grabbed the edge of his desk for support, his mind racing through possibilities. Office politics? A misunderstanding? He'd been a model employee for 7 years, had consistently exceeded his targets, had networked with all the right people. This didn't make sense. "On what grounds?" Marcus demanded, his voice rising. "I want to speak to my supervisor. I want to speak to Director Patterson." "This is absurd." "Your supervisor was informed this morning," Rebecca said calmly. "The decision came from executive leadership. I'm not at liberty to discuss the details, but you'll receive a formal letter explaining the termination. You're being let go for restructuring purposes. You'll receive 2 weeks severance." 2 weeks severance? After 7 years. Marcus felt rage building in his chest as he threw personal items into the box Rebecca provided. His framed photo with Victoria, his motivational quotes, the nameplate that said Marcus Wilson, Senior Account Manager, that he'd been so proud of. Around him, colleagues whispered and avoided eye contact, already treating him like a ghost. As security escorted him out, Marcus's phone buzzed with a notification from his bank. He pulled it up, expecting to see his usual balance, but instead found a message that made his blood run cold. His credit card had been declined. His savings account showed a balance of $300. The joint account he shared with Elena, which had always maintained a healthy cushion of $50,000 that he'd assumed came from his bonuses and her inheritance, was completely empty with a note. "Account closed by primary holder." Marcus sat in his car in the parking lot, hands shaking as he tried to process what was happening. He called Victoria, needing her reassurance, needing her to tell him everything would be okay. "Marcus?" Victoria's voice sounded strained. "Where are you? Something really weird is happening. I just got a call from a law firm saying I need to vacate the house immediately. They're saying the property doesn't belong to you, that we're trespassing. They're threatening to call the police if I'm not out by tonight." "That's impossible," Marcus said, though his voice lacked conviction. The house is in my name. I've been paying the mortgage for 5 years. That's what I told them. Victoria's panic was palpable. But they have documents, Marcus. Legal documents. They're saying the house belongs to some trust, some corporation I've never heard of. They're saying you were just an authorized occupant, not the owner. How is that possible? Did Elena do something? Did she forge documents? Marcus's mind flashed back to the divorce, to how easily Elena had signed away her rights to the house, to how she'd asked for nothing except to continue her hospital volunteer work. At the time, he'd thought she was being reasonable, even pathetic. Now a cold dread was settling in his stomach. I'll figure this out, Marcus said, though he had no idea how. Just pack our things. We'll get a hotel while I sort through this mess. But when Marcus tried to book a hotel room, his credit card was declined again. His phone buzzed with another notification. His car payment had bounced. His insurance had been canceled. In the span of 3 hours, Marcus's entire financial life had collapsed like a house of cards, and he couldn't understand how or why. That evening, sitting in Victoria's cramped studio apartment, because she'd never actually sold her own place despite moving into his house, Marcus received an email that would change everything. The subject line read, "Regarding your divorce settlement." Elena sat in her corner office 60 floors above Manhattan, the city sprawling beneath her like a kingdom she'd built brick by brick, decision by decision. The name on the door read E. Morrison, CEO, Morrison Holdings, though very few people knew that E. Morrison and Elena Wilson were the same person. She'd kept her maiden name for business, had constructed elaborate firewalls between her public persona as a powerful CEO and her private life as Marcus's unassuming wife. Her assistant, James, knocked softly before entering. The termination at Meridian is complete. Wilson was escorted out this morning. The property eviction notice has been served. His accounts have been frozen pending the divorce settlement calculation as per standard procedure for marital asset division. Elena nodded, her hand unconsciously moving to her stomach. 12 weeks pregnant now, and the morning sickness had finally subsided. She'd had her first ultrasound yesterday, had seen the tiny heartbeat flickering on the screen, had cried alone in the examination room because the moment she'd imagined sharing with Marcus had turned into a solitary grief. "And the letter?" Elena asked quietly. "Sent 30 minutes ago. He should be reading it right now." Elena pulled up the security feed from Meridian Industries, something she'd been able to access since she owned the parent company that owned Meridian. She watched Marcus being escorted out, saw the confusion and rage on his face, and felt nothing but a hollow ache where love used to live. This was the man she'd chosen, the man she'd hidden her empire from because she wanted to be loved for herself, not her money. She'd met him at a charity gala where she was a donor, and he was a junior employee of one of her subsidiary companies, and she'd fallen for his charm, his apparent ambition, his easy smile. She remembered their wedding day, how she'd stood at the altar wearing a simple dress instead of the designer gown her wealth could afford, how she'd promised to love him through everything, how she'd truly believed they would build a life together. She'd given him a job at Meridian, though he never knew she'd arranged it. She'd bought the house through a trust, letting him believe his mortgage payments were building equity. She'd played the role of supportive wife while running a multi-billion-dollar empire in the shadows, taking volunteer shifts that were actually board meetings, claiming book club when she was negotiating international deals. The deception had been exhausting, but Elena had convinced herself it was necessary. She'd grown up in foster care after her parents died in a car accident when she was 8, had built her first company from a technical patent she'd developed in college, had learned young that people treated you differently when they knew you had money. She'd wanted one relationship, one space in her life, where she was just Elena, not E. Morrison, the billionaire CEO. But she'd chosen wrong. She'd chosen a man whose ego was more fragile than his love, who could be swayed by flattery and a pretty face, who would abandon his pregnant wife without a second thought. The pregnancy test had been positive the same week she'd found Victoria's lipstick on his collar, and Elena had made a choice. She would protect her child from a father who didn't deserve to know them, and she would protect herself from a man who had proven himself unworthy of the trust she'd placed in him. James cleared his throat gently. "There's something else. Victoria Harris. Our background check revealed some interesting information." Elena looked up sharply. What kind of information? She has a pattern. 3 previous relationships with wealthy or successful men, each ending with her securing significant financial settlements or properties. She specifically targets men in transitional periods, offers emotional support, then moves in for the claim. Marcus Wilson fits her pattern perfectly. Mid-level executive, comfortable life, susceptible to ego stroking. So Victoria hadn't just been a friend who'd betrayed her. She'd been a predator who'd identified prey. Elena felt a complicated mixture of vindication and sadness. Marcus had been played, but he'd also been willing. He'd made his choices. Let them have each other, Elena said quietly. They deserve what they're about to discover. Her phone buzzed with a message from her lawyer. Marcus had received the letter, had read the truth, and was demanding an emergency meeting. Elena checked her watch. Let him wait. Let him suffer the way she'd suffered watching her marriage crumble. Let him feel the powerlessness she'd felt signing divorce papers while carrying his child. Then maybe they would talk. Marcus read the email 3 times before the words finally penetrated his shock. It was from a law firm he'd never heard of, one with offices in New York, London, Tokyo, and Dubai based on their letterhead. The letter was formal, clinical, devastating. Dear Mr. Wilson, regarding your recent divorce from Elena Morrison Wilson. As you were unaware of your wife's assets during your marriage, we are required by law to inform you of the full scope of marital property for equitable division purposes. Elena Morrison Wilson, known professionally as E. Morrison, is the founder and CEO of Morrison Holdings, a privately held conglomerate with assets exceeding $4.2 billion. Your wife's personal fortune is estimated at approximately $800 million. The properties you believe you owned, including your marital residence valued at $2.3 million, are held in trust by Morrison Holdings and were never marital assets. Your employment at Meridian Industries, a subsidiary of Morrison Holdings, has been terminated as part of the standard procedure when personal relationships intersect with corporate hierarchy. Per your signed divorce agreement, you waived all claims to marital assets in exchange for a modest settlement. However, given your wife's pregnancy with your biological child, she is required to inform you of the child's existence. Mrs. Wilson is currently 12 weeks pregnant and has requested no contact, no custody, and no financial support from you. She will raise the child independently. You have severed all legal rights to custody or visitation per the divorce agreement clause regarding abandonment. Should you wish to contest any portion of this settlement, please contact our office. The phone slipped from Marcus's hand. Elena was E. Morrison. Elena owned Morrison Holdings. Elena was one of the richest women in America. Elena was pregnant with his child. The room spun as Marcus tried to reconcile the quiet, unassuming woman he'd divorced with the business titan he'd read about in Forbes and the Wall Street Journal. E. Morrison was legendary in business circles, a self-made billionaire who'd revolutionized medical technology, who sat on the boards of Fortune 500 companies, who had been named one of the most influential people in technology. And he'd divorced her. He'd thrown her away for Victoria. He'd told her she brought nothing to the marriage. Marcus! Victoria's voice cut through his shock. She was reading over his shoulder, her face pale. Elena is E. Morrison? The E. Morrison? I didn't know, Marcus whispered. She never told me. Why didn't she tell me? Victoria's expression was shifting, calculating. $800 million. Marcus, we have to fix this. You have to get her back. That baby is your ticket to everything. Custody rights, child support from a billionaire. We could live like royalty. Marcus felt sick. Was that what he'd become? Someone who saw his unborn child as a ticket to wealth? Someone who would crawl back to a woman he'd betrayed because of her money? He looked at Victoria, really looked at her for the first time since the affair began, and saw a stranger. She wasn't thinking about his pain or Elena's betrayal or the life they destroyed. She was already calculating angles, schemes, ways to profit from the wreckage. Get out, Marcus said quietly. What? Get out of my sight. This is your fault. You targeted me, didn't you? You researched me, figured out I was married to someone with money, and you played me like a fiddle. Victoria's mask slipped, revealing something cold underneath. Don't be naive, Marcus. You wanted to be played. You wanted someone to tell you how special you were, how underappreciated. I just gave you what you were looking for. And yes, I did my research. I knew Elena Morrison's husband worked at Meridian. I knew there was money in that marriage. I just didn't realize how much. She grabbed her purse, her movements sharp with anger. You're a fool, Marcus. You had everything, and you threw it away because your ego needed stroking. Don't blame me for holding the mirror. The door slammed behind her, leaving Marcus alone with the wreckage of his choices. He pulled out his phone and tried to call Elena, but the number was disconnected. He tried the house phone, but it rang endlessly. He searched for Morrison Holdings' corporate number, but when he called and asked for E. Morrison, the receptionist politely informed him that Ms. Morrison didn't take unsolicited calls. Marcus sat on Victoria's shabby couch, in her cramped apartment that smelled of cheap perfume and desperation, and realized he'd traded a palace for a prison cell. 6 months later, Elena stood in the nursery she'd designed herself, her hand resting on her prominent belly as she watched the sunset paint the Manhattan skyline in shades of gold and rose. The room was perfect, soft blues and creams, with a mural of clouds and stars that she'd commissioned from a local artist. There was a rocking chair by the window where she planned to nurse, shelves already lined with books she'd read to her daughter, because the ultrasound had revealed she was having a girl. She decided to name her daughter Sophia after her own mother. Sophia Morrison, no hyphenated last name, connecting her to the father who'd abandoned them. Elena had the best lawyers, the best prenatal care, the best of everything money could buy, but what she wanted most was for her daughter to grow up knowing she was loved, knowing she was wanted, knowing she was enough exactly as she was. The divorce had been finalized 4 months ago. Marcus had tried to fight it, had tried to claim he deserved custody rights, but the agreement he'd signed was ironclad. He'd abandoned his pregnant wife. He'd waived all claims. His lawyers had found no loopholes in the documents Elena's team had carefully constructed. He'd signed away his rights in pursuit of Victoria. And now he would live with that choice. Elena had offered him one mercy. She'd sent a letter, delivered by her lawyer, explaining why she'd hidden her wealth. She'd told him about growing up in foster care, about learning that people saw dollar signs instead of humanity when they knew about money, about wanting to be loved for herself. She'd told him about the baby, about how she would make sure their daughter knew her father had existed but had made different choices. She'd told him she forgave him, not for his sake, but for her own peace. She hadn't expected a response, and she didn't get one. Marcus had disappeared from public view, his social media deleted, his life seemingly imploded. She'd heard through business channels that he was working at a small firm in Pennsylvania, starting over, alone. Victoria had moved on to her next target, another executive with a nice title and a comfortable life, another man susceptible to flattery and false promises. Elena felt a kick, strong and insistent, and smiled despite the tears that threatened to fall. She'd lost a husband but gained clarity. She'd lost a friend but gained self-respect. She'd lost the illusion of a normal life but gained the truth of her own strength. And soon she'd hold her daughter, would look into eyes that might mirror Marcus's, but would belong entirely to a new soul, innocent and perfect. "We're going to be okay," Elena whispered to her belly, to Sophia, to herself. "Better than okay. We're going to be extraordinary." Her phone buzzed with a message from James. Morrison Holdings had just closed a deal that would expand their medical technology division into 14 new countries, a move that would save countless lives and generate billions in revenue. E. Morrison's empire continued to grow, while Elena Morrison prepared for the most important role of her life. She thought about what Marcus had said in that coffee shop, about how she'd brought nothing to their marriage. He'd been wrong, but he'd also been accidentally prophetic. She'd brought everything to the marriage: her wealth, her power, her love, her loyalty, her future. And Marcus had looked at all of it and seen nothing, because he'd never learned to see her at all. The nursery door opened and her assistant stepped in. "Miss Morrison, the journalist from Forbes is here for your interview. They want to do a profile on how you built your empire while maintaining such complete privacy." Elena smiled. Perhaps it was time to step into the light, to let E. Morrison and Elena Wilson become one integrated whole instead of two separate identities. Her daughter would grow up knowing her mother's full truth, the power and the vulnerability, the wealth and the heartbreak, the empire and the woman who'd built it. "Tell them I'll be right there," Elena said, taking one last look at the nursery. "And James, thank you for everything." As she walked toward her future, Elena felt the weight of the past 6 months lifting. Marcus and Victoria had done her a favor in their betrayal. They'd shown her who they really were before she'd wasted more years on illusions. They'd freed her to be fully herself, to raise her daughter without compromise, to build the life she deserved rather than the one she'd been settling for. What she'd done had shocked them, yes. The revelation of her empire, the swift legal actions, the complete reversal of their fortunes. But what shocked Elena most was how little she missed them, how complete she felt standing alone in the ruins they'd created together, how ready she was to build something better from the ashes. In the end, Marcus had been right about one thing. Their marriage was over, but he'd been wrong about everything else. Elena hadn't been coasting on his success. He'd been living in the shadow of her empire all along, too blind to see the sun.